This is Chris Carr. I'm the host of the Initiative podcast. This is our first episode. What we're trying to do here is talk to regular people doing interesting things. And so the whole idea behind this podcast is to talk to people who are doing, again, interesting things in their lives so that, people that are out there, if you ever wanted to learn how you might want to climb a mountain in Africa, you don't have to start from zero. And we can actually hear from somebody today that did that. We're going to try every week or two to talk to somebody new, and we'll see how it goes. I apologize in advance for any audio issues. We're still learning how to get all our podcast equipment in place here, but we're working on that. And finally, one of the things I'll do at the end of the show is I'll give you an email address. If there's something interesting that you're doing, would like to kind of shout out and have us recognize that and maybe bring you on as a guest one of these days, we'll give you an email address. We're just not looking to talk to people who I know. We're also looking to talk to people out there who might be listening to this, whoever you are out there in the dark internet ether. Our first guest today is my lifelong friend, Bernardette Arellano. I've known her for 28 years, and I know she's from the garlic capital of the country, which is Gilroy, California. She now lives with the family in Chicago. We're going to talk about a few of the interesting things that she did. So I guess my first question, Bernardette, Gilroy, California, is it the garlic capital of the country or the world as well?
Well, if you talk to the people in Gilroy, it's the garlic capital of the world. But I think that crown now resides in China, unfortunately.
Okay.
So the peak of the agricultural days are past Gilroy, but they still produce quite a lot of garlic, and I think that they still like to style themselves the garlic capital of the world.
I was visiting a friend a couple weeks ago in Silicon Valley, and I saw like there's like the train that goes to Gilroy, and I'm like, hey, that's the garlic capital. I was telling this Russian fella I know, and anyway, I was proud of that trivia that I knew. So okay, so you're from California, and one of the first things I want to talk to you about is we went to school together, but after school, you served for some time on the legislative staff of California Congressman Mike Honda. Can you tell us a little bit about how somebody ends up in a place where you're in the halls of Washington helping create policy for our legislators?
Sure. So I think in my case, I think in my case was a little bit of a fluke, if I'm going to be totally honest. After I got to DC and I figured out more about how things work, I realized that the way I got onto Mike Honda's staff was really kind of a product of how unique he was as a member, how unique his leadership staff was within the office, and just sort of being in the right place at the right time. So I think that the way I ended up on staff is maybe a little different than how people normally end up on staff. So I'll just do a quick timeline. Basically, my father was in local politics. He was on city council in Gilroy. And I had been out of school for almost a year and I was very depressed. I had majored in religion and I had done that because I didn't really know what I wanted to study. I didn't really know what I wanted to quote unquote do. And so I was interested in religion. I'm still glad that I majored in it. I think it's been very useful over the years to me philosophically and personally. But it, didn't really, it's not like you can walk out and be a preacher or go to law school immediately. I had no idea how to follow up college. So my dad met Mike at an event and Congressman Honda and my dad started talking and my dad mentioned that I had gone to Princeton and maybe there would be an internship or a spot in his staff. And so his staff actually called me. They reached out to me and they said that they had an internship position. And now this is before they changed the law and made it so that internships had to be paid. So I worked for a brief time just answering phones and doing some stuff in the front office for him. Obviously I did submit my resume and things like that. And so they brought me on, even though I was like, I think a little bit outside of the age range of what you would normally get from an intern. And then after a couple months, they had a position open up as a staffer there in the district office. So then I moved over. They offered me the position, and I moved onto the official staff at that point. And I started out as a legislative aide. Well, it wasn't a legislative aide, but I was there in the district office. And so I was helping out with constituent work. So helping people with their Social Security applications, immigration paperwork, anything having to do with the federal government, if they were stuck or they didn't have a way forward or they had questions about the process, we had contacts within the federal agencies and we could get responses for them and to move things along. So that was what I did for a good couple of years. And then eventually a position opened up in his DC staff. His transportation legislative assistant was going to be moving on and moving out of the office. And so they asked me if I would be interested in working on Capitol Hill as his transportation and healthcare legislative assistant. And so I was very interested and I felt very fortunate. And I flew out there and I ended up taking a position in DC from the district office. In hindsight, so then I stayed on for 4 years. In hindsight, honestly, that trajectory was a little unusual. His office was very interested in promoting internally and from the district. And I had not worked on his campaign. I had not worked previously in politics. I did not have a policy background. And so all of that was a little unusual. I think when a legislator comes to DC, frequently they will have some of their campaign staff or people that they met through the campaign come on board, or they'll hire people within DC who are familiar with the rhythms of the Hill and who have the policy experience already. So it was a really big opportunity that I think that I appreciated at the time, but that certainly isn't kind of the normal trajectory. Normally, you don't always come with the member to Capitol Hill from the district. That's a bit unusual. Usually those are separate hirings. But it just depends on the office. Lots of offices have different procedures, and Mike's office had a very tight, very positive, really wonderful environment for developing staff. And to this day, I still consider those people some of the best people I've ever worked with, and we're still in touch. And he has a huge network of ex-staffers who are very close and really care about each other. So I was very lucky.
Excellent. So it sounds like you put in a few years kind of in the trenches doing constituent services. Is that what they call it, kind of at the congressional level in terms of like?
Yeah,
Okay,
constituent services. Yeah.
great.
It was really amazing work, and it's a resource that I wish that more people were aware of in their congressional office, because I think it would change people's opinion of what their legislator can accomplish for them.
Gotcha. And so when you make the transition from the district, it sounds like Gilroy was part of the district. What area of California did Mike Honda represent?
So Mike Honda represented the south part of San Jose, Morgan Hill, Gilroy. We were located in the Prune Yard in Campbell, California. So that was part of the district. And our neighboring district was Zoe Lofgren and Anna Issue up in Palo Alto.
Cool. And so when you make the transition to Washington, you're working as a legislative aide still at this point. Is that right?
Yeah, legislative
Okay,
assistant.
legislative assistant. And what years was that? Like what period? So we kind of let listeners know,
Sure.
from this time to this time.
So I joined his staff in 2003,
Okay.
and I went to DC in 2006. So 2000, yeah, this is a long time ago.
Yep. Yep.
2005, I think, fall of 2005 into 2006. And so it was a big time. He actually, right when I got on board, he had just gotten appointed to the Appropriations Committee,
Okay.
which was a very important. It's less important now because they've changed some of the ways that Congress works, but at the time, Appropriations was still a pretty powerful committee because it had the ability to, well, had the authority to partition out like a um, discretionary funding within different programs and also among members. So there was funding that was made available for people for district projects. And so legislators had a certain amount, a certain number of projects that they could earmark. So this is where the earmarking came in of private projects that people could put in place in their districts. And that was a very tangible way that legislators used to show people the direct impact of Congress in the district. Because a lot of times the funding that is dispersed by the federal government, obviously can be abused, that kind of direct benefit to a district. But also it very tangibly, you got a bridge built, or you got a negative pressure room built for a hospital, or, it's a very tangible accomplishment and specific thing that you can point to within your district. So it was very powerful at the time because the Appropriations Committee decided how much each person got and which appropriations project was approved. So it was quite an important committee position.
So were you on the Hill then, and maybe you were even part of this whenever the Affordable Care Act was being drafted and passed?
Yes. So I did healthcare policy. So that was in 2009, 2010, right? And so I left Congress in 2010. So I left DC and came back to California 2010, 2011. And so I left pretty much right after the Affordable Care Act was passed. Um, Honestly, it was because I was very burned out.
I can imagine.
But yes, so we were on appropriations. We were on the Labor, Health, and Human Services subcommittee. And my boss at the time was the chairman of the Asian Pacific Islander caucus. And so in that caucus position, he was kind of the point person for talking about APIA issues within health and in the healthcare bill. So that was quite a bit of it was quite a bit of work.
Excellent. So you spent some time in DC. You moved back to California for a bit, and then you came to join us in Chicago.
Yes,
And one of the things you've been doing while you've been here in Chicago is you started a podcast of your own, and I'm going to butcher the name here.
it's okay.
Called.
I realize I have to change the name. It is so difficult to pronounce.
Why don't you say it so I don't embarrass myself and tell people what that's about?
Okay, the podcast is called Casa Acozamalotl, which means a house of the rainbow. Casa means house in Spanish, and Acozamalotl means rainbow in Nahuatl, which is the language spoken in indigenous to Mexico, the area around Mexico City, Aztecs, basically. So I chose the name because I wanted to kind of talk about issues from the perspective of my very varied family background, racial and ethnic background. And so the podcast, the purpose of it is for people who are both racial and ethnic and religious minorities to share their spiritual journey. So this is people who are not Christian or Jewish within the United States, or who aren't, non-denominational, but still kind of fall under this Judeo-Christian umbrella. I was really interested in, people who might be mixed race like me, or Latinos or African Americans, who chose to pursue and practice spiritual traditions that are very minority. So pagan spiritual tradition, Norse heathenry, Aztec revivalism, Ifa, West, African diaspora religions, because there really is, I think, in this country, it's so dominated by Christianity. It is so dominated by Christianity that you forget that there are people who are religious, people who are not Christian. It's, people like to ask each other, do you believe in God? And, that's a really, like, they're making the assumption that it is the Judeo-Christian God. And the answer is either yes or no, right? And instead of, well, I believe something different, right? But I still believe in a spiritual structure. I just don't believe in like your idea of a God. But I think that the default conversation around being a religious person in the United States comes down to a Judeo-Christian umbrella of terms. And it's particularly difficult in some minority communities to make a different spiritual choice. And so to feel both a racial and ethnic, be a racial and ethnic minority with all of the experiences that comes with it, and also to be a spiritual minority, in some cases facing prejudice and disapproval from people who share your racial and ethnic minority status, I felt was like a really interesting thing to discuss and explore with other people. So my podcast is about kind of my own journey in that direction, then also that of other people's. And I've had a couple of guests who've been really kind to share their stories, and I'm planning on a few more coming up.
And how much podcasting had you done before you started this?
Oh, zero.
Okay.
None, none. I listen to a lot of podcasts, so I thought, well, gee, I can do that. How hard is that? Turns out
It can be a little tricky, I
it
know.
can be kind of tricky.
But it's
Yeah.
doable. You've done it. How many episodes do you think you've published up to this point?
Oh my gosh, I have to look because it's been on hiatus for a bit because life got overwhelming, and then there was the whole me climbing a mountain thing and kids. So I think I'm up to 10 or 11 episodes.
Excellent.
I'd have to look back and see, but yeah, I think that's what I'm up to. Oh, one thing I do want to note about my time in DC is that I got there right before Obama became president,
Okay.
and so I was there when he was inaugurated, and it was an amazing experience. So that was an extremely amazing time, and it was very. I always feel very lucky to have um, witnessed the kind of hard work and leadership that he and the other congressional leaders displayed during that time. It was really great.
Well, I know Chicago was very excited when that happened, and I think we might have filled up Grant Park that
Yeah,
evening.
no, I heard about that.
I was throwing like an election watch party when I had time to do that, and I think about 3/4 of my guests left after they'd called the race to go down to Grant Park and
Oh my God, I can't
be a
even
part of the
imagine
party.
how
So
exciting it would have been to be here.
yeah. Well, you mentioned something about climbing a mountain. So what's that all about? And tell us more.
Sure. So this was a complete surprise. My father called me in January, and I was cleaning my house. And my dad told me it was his 74th birthday, and I said it was going to be his 74th birthday, and I said, "Yeah, that's great. We should really plan something for you." And he said, "Well, I think I'm going to climb Kilimanjaro for my
Okay.
birthday." And I said, "Wow, that's great, Dad. Good job. Go for it. Go for it." And then he said, "Yeah, so I was wondering if you would come with me and climb
Okay.
the mountain with me." Yeah.
And just for our
So
listeners, where is Kilimanjaro?
so Kilimanjaro is in Tanzania. It is
Okay.
the highest freestanding mountain in Africa. It is, I believe, the fourth tallest peak in the world.
Oh, wow.
I think fourth or fifth tallest, something like that. The peak is 19,300 feet above
Okay.
sea level, and it's located near the border of Tanzania and Kenya in
Yep.
East Africa.
And I
Um,
imagine to steal a Lord of the Rings meme, one does not just walk up to Kilimanjaro. I imagine there's probably some preparation you had to do to get ready for that.
yeah, I think one of the interesting things about the trek is that it is one of the mountains that's considered non-technical.
Okay.
So, meaning that you don't need ice picks, you don't need like special gear to climb it, right? You just climb it. You do just walk up Kilimanjaro. However,
Okay.
that being said, because of the altitude, right, there is a considerable amount of preparation. It's mostly mental preparation. I think that it's not exaggerating things to say that the experience of climbing the mountain was as difficult, tied probably with the physical experience of having children.
Okay.
So it is a very interesting, transformative, deep experience. At least it was for me. So I actually I took a journal with me, and I thought that I would write, maybe a page or two here or there.
Yep.
And I ended up writing 110 pages in my journal about the whole trip. So I'm actually in the process of turning that into a book for my family. So I'm in the process of writing it all out. I'm now on like page 47 of, of a Word document. that I want to put together with pictures and stuff, because it really was a very special experience. And I'm very glad that I got to share it with my father. We did not summit at the same time. I met him when I was coming back down from the summit. So we have a picture of ourselves together on the top of the mountain, but not at the peak, because it was just, it's so difficult. We were both exhausted at that point.
I'll bet. And so for your climb, though, you arrive in Tanzania, you're at the base of the mountain. How much time is it going from the bottom of that to the top?
It depends, oddly enough. So, first of all, a note about preparation. If
Yes.
this is something that one of your listeners thinks they might want to attempt, I will just say that just because it says it is non-technical does not mean that it is not grueling or difficult, right? And so, in terms of preparation leading up to the trek, I trained 4 to 6 times a week doing endurance cardio and weightlifting and yoga. I added in some breath work, and I also was very diligent about tracking down exactly what I needed to take on the trip and what I would need on the mountain. They almost, well, I think you're required to use an outfitter. You might not be required to, but I would highly recommend using a reputable outfitter, because there are people who get there who are definitely not prepared, and people die doing this trek. They die from altitude sickness. They die due to overexertion. So it is not, just because it is not technical does not mean it is not difficult or does not require significant mental and physical preparation. So as far as how long it takes to get to the top, the longer you take, the better your chances of success are. So you can take, there is a route that you can go up and down in, I think, as short as like 3 days, maybe less. I think, like, what's the guy who's the Iceman? The like,
Oh, I don't even know.
oh, he's come on. Oh, I'm gonna think of, maybe you can put it in the show notes later. He's the guy that does all the like ice cold plunges, and he's like
Okay.
that guru. Anyways, he did it in, I guess, like a day or two. Like, he basically ran up the mountain and ran down. But that is an excellent
Wow.
way. That is an excellent way to kill yourself. So don't do that. I would say, like, we snuck up on the mountain, so it took us 5 days to go up and 2 days to come down. I think I'm getting that right. I keep mixing it up and thinking maybe it was like 9 days, so it was 7 days to go up and 2 days to go down. But I don't think so. I think it was 5 up and 2 down. It just feels very long.
Yep.
But the longer you take to get up to the top, the better your chances of success. And so our guide said that, in his parlance, that we were sneaking up on the mountain,
Okay.
because what you don't want to do is you don't want to get altitude sickness, and altitude sickness can hit anybody no matter how good a shape you're in.
Yep.
You could be an Olympic athlete and get sick with altitude sickness. So it's just about luck, taking Diamox, doing the best you can to prep your cardiovascular system.
Hmm.
And in my case, I loaded up on like every supplement that had any whisper of a chance of helping me. So I was drinking beet juice. I was I was drinking beet juice and taking maca and taking, what else did I take? Of cordyceps. So I was like loaded up on supplements and Diamox, and
Okay.
that's how I attacked the mountain.
And so it's taking several days for you to get up to the top. There's like infrastructure and huts you stay in along the way. Are you packing a tent?
No, so this is kind of where a lot of it's a very interesting thing, because it's similar to Nepal in the sense that you have your outfitters have local people who carry the bulk of your gear up. So
Okay.
for most of these outfitters, you're basically carrying a day pack with layers and water.
Okay.
Okay. And then somebody else carries your duffel bag with the rest of your stuff. Because when you ascend Kilimanjaro, you go through 5 different climatic zones. So you start in tropical, and the top is polar desert.
Mhm.
So you're going through multiple different layers of environment. So you have to take a good number of a wide variety of clothing. So all that adds up. And then most of the trek companies you can rent polar rated sleeping bags, because it can be negative 40 degrees at the top of the mountain.
Wow.
So polar rated sleeping bags, the, like, North Face kind of alpine polar tents, and most of them I think all of them actually usually have cooking staff. So ours was a very large outfit done through Stanford. So
Okay.
we had a lot of staff. For the 12 of us, there were 80 staff members, 80, 80, to
Wow.
carry our stuff, break down and carry all of the equipment, set it up. So this is not like a backwoods thing, right? This is
Yep.
a very pampered kind of excursion. So even so, it's still physically difficult. And so that's kind of, you're not really carrying much of your own gear, I guess is the short way of saying that.
I imagine the people that are working for those outfitters, they must be some of the people on earth in the best shape of their lives, I imagine, just if that's what they're doing for a living.
Yeah, it was a very interesting thing because a few of them spoke pretty good English. There were a couple of women who were porters with us on the trail, which I think is still pretty unusual. Most of the porters are usually men. I also will say I think they are fit, but I think that it's more about people need money. And in Tanzania, I think one thing I didn't realize is there's just a base level of activity that's much higher than anybody in the United States. When we got there, people walk, they bike, and they carry. I saw women routinely carrying massive loads of carrots, greens, vegetables, fruit on their head.
Yep.
People are used to carrying and moving much more than we are here. So I think just their base level of fitness is higher. Like when we were going up to the mountain, there was a field of carrots, and people were pulling the carrots by hand, stacking them, loading giant burlap sacks, and carrying those giant burlap sacks to a truck, all by hand.
This is on the side of the mountain. They're raising the carrots.
Yeah, this is so what's interesting
Wow.
is Kilimanjaro is there's a national park, right? That's a national
Okay.
park. But leading up to the edges of the national park, like there's agriculture. So, I think basically the national park officially ends where it becomes too steep for people to till and to
Yeah.
plant.
Excellent. Wow. So you said there's 5 climate zones up there. You started at tropical, so that's the bottom. We have polar desert at the top. What are the other 3 in between?
Yeah. So I'm gonna have to look this up really quick because I don't know if I'm gonna get them all right.
Okay.
Um, but starts off with rainforest.
Okay.
Then you have the moorland.
Okay.
Oh, I'm sorry. So it's 4. So the
Okay.
very base is farmland, which you drive
Yep.
past. Rainforest, moorland or the heather,
Mm-hmm.
alpine desert,
Okay.
and then polar or Arctic.
And what's the difference between the alpine desert and the polar desert?
Well, the alpine desert has plants,
Okay. Okay. That's a big
and the
difference.
Arctic has nothing. It
Gotcha.
has it has nothing. There is no lichen. There is
Yep.
no moss. There is no plant. There's nothing.
And is that just because of the lack of oxygen up there? Is that the reason?
It's very cold and it's very dry,
Gotcha.
and it's about half of the oxygen that you have available to you at sea level.
Okay. Wow.
So at sea level, 20% of the air is oxygen, and at 19,000 feet, 10% of the air is oxygen.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's pretty amazing. So again, regular people doing interesting things here. So I want to kind of close out here talking to you. You mentioned before that you're here in Chicago now, which we're glad to have you. And you're trying to start a couple small businesses while raising 2 small humans. How's that going?
Yes. Spotty. But I think I just have too many ideas that I'm fascinated by. So I still want to move forward on my podcast. That's like a passion project. I don't really think it's a bit of a niche, but I think the people for whom it's for, I think there's an audience out there. I just have to find them. I'm writing this story about my climb,
Yep.
and I am starting a educational consulting firm to try and help parents in the Chicago area make decisions about early childhood education for their kids, because there's a lot of consulting and focus on high school, on the journey into high school, but there are so many options at the early childhood level that I think it's overwhelming and confusing. And if you're a working parent, it's really hard to sift through all of the information to figure out who you need to apply to, when, what kind. Do I want Montessori? Do I want to go public? Do I want to go private? Do I want to go Catholic? There's just so many options. So I think helping parents to sift through that is one thing that I want to do. And then I'm working with a woman to around motherhood ceremonies and motherhood blessing ceremonies that women can design for themselves. So she's a psychiatrist that works with women who are postpartum, pre and postpartum around depression and anxiety. And she and I started talking, and I talked about the motherhood ceremony I planned for myself. And we talked about how that would be something that might help more women with the really intense transition into motherhood. And so we're looking forward to planning a couple of workshops for people in the area to try and help them get started on planning something like that for themselves.
Well, it sounds like you have a full plate.
Yeah, I think I may have overreached, but I want to try all of these things. Life is so interesting, Chris. There's so much to do.
I'm the last person to be saying you're doing too much stuff, but that's beside the point. But
I know you're publishing books and now you're starting a podcast and you have your amazing, like your email. Your email, by the way, I know we don't want to dive into politics, but your last email was
the
really
Substack
amazing.
stuff. Oh,
Yeah, you're a very good writer.
that's a place for me to vent.
Yeah.
But I'm glad to hear that you're starting a business about the early childhood education, because the community I live in, where we live at, it kind of serves as like a almost like a starter home incubator. There's the unit right across from me. It happens all the time where a new couple got married, they're moving in, it's their first home. They have one kid, everything's great, everybody's awesome. They have second kids, things are starting to get small, and they move on. That's literally happened like 3 or 4 times, just right in front of me. And
Yeah.
so, talking to the parents that I know in my community, we're not parents ourselves, so we're not having to worry about all of that complexity. But I can imagine that resource is going to be pretty well appreciated. So you'll have to let me know when it comes online, and I've got plenty of people to direct your way. So
Yeah, I will. I think too what happens a lot of times with parents is there's a knee jerk, especially with all the news about CPS. And I think there's a knee jerk response to think that Chicago public schools are automatically bad. And I think that it's very important for parents to visit and to become familiar with their local school, because when I toured 12 schools for my
okay,
kids to try and figure out where I wanted to go send them to and where we wanted to apply. And almost all of them were excellent schools that showed that they had caring leadership and interesting teachers and all of these wonderful things. So I think that there are definitely parts of this city that don't have that, but I think that
mm-hmm.
it's worth people investigating and not just dismissing the public school system out of hand, at
I
least at
think
this point.
this might be something that I'm pretty sensitive to, because I came up in a small rural high school. There's
Mm.
colleges I applied to I didn't get into because I didn't have art class on my transcript, because we didn't
All
have
right.
art class in our school. So
Right.
that's the thing, is there's so much opportunity out there. I think that people don't really recognize, and they get too obsessed with what's the ratings and the rankings and all of that. And I think you're doing the right thing by going in and actually seeing kind of what's going on the ground and seeing what can we make of this, which I think is awesome. Um, well, anyways, I don't want to keep you too much longer here. This has been a great conversation, and I thank you again for joining us here on this inaugural edition. For all the stuff that Bernadette's talked about, I will be posting links to like her podcast and things like that within the show notes, so people want to subscribe to that, which I recommend you do. It's super, super interesting. I'm not a religious guy
Thank
by any
you.
means, but I enjoy every episode that comes out, and I'm always learning something. And thanks again for coming on. And we might do a follow up episode in a little bit to see how the new business is going, and how the two humans might be doing when they're maybe not so small. So
That's true. They do grow very fast. Thank you so much. I'm really honored that you asked me to be on this, and I think
well,
it's a great. I think you're doing a great job here.
you're one of the people in my life you're always doing something interesting. There's always stories that you can tell, and you were kind of like a natural first guest for me to say, "Hey, you want to hop aboard and do this with me?" And thanks again for coming on. So,
All
and for
right.
everybody else, stay tuned. If you have Spotify, where you can subscribe to the show on Spotify, I'll put links in the show notes. Apple, We should be in Google Podcasts now. I'll take a look at that. But we've got a pretty good schedule of guests scheduled to come aboard. And so stay tuned. And I'm going to do my best to try to surprise everybody here from episode to episode with other folks who are doing interesting things. So have a good one, and we'll talk to you later. Bye bye.